Tonight, Panorama asks, how safe are Britain's hospitals?
One dose of antibiotics and all of it could have been avoided.
As new data is published on hospitals at bursting point, we uncover significant problems in the NHS.
Doctors, nurses, managers do not realise that the level of harm that's going on in hospitals.
We reveal how thousands of people are dying needlessly.
I can't ever let that happen to anybody else's mum.
And what happens to patients and health professionals who dare to speak out?
There's hundreds and hundreds of nurses and doctors and managers that have been bullied into silence.
With the largest reorganisation in the history of the NHS underway, we ask, could it lead to future scandals?
There's a false assurance that things have changed, but actually, where it matters, they haven't.
At the London 2012 opening ceremony, the world was invited to celebrate the NHS. A health system that for 60 years has been the pride of Britain and the envy of the world, providing free and effective healthcare for everyone who needs it. But now that system is under enormous stress, with massive increase in demand and huge financial pressures. Over the last 17 years, successive governments have introduced at least 16 new patient safety initiatives. And yet still, every year, thousands of people are dying or suffering unnecessary harm as a direct result of being in hospital. That's something the government says it can no longer tolerate.
We must be honest about failure. I need to say this to all managers. You will be held responsible for the care in your establishments. Good care matters as much as good treatment.
Many of the problems still happening today were first identified 5 years ago in one of the biggest scandals in the 60-year history of the NHS. Mid-Staffordshire. The public inquiry into why the scandal wasn't uncovered sooner is due out early next year, but for some families, it can't come soon enough. After a fall at home, former cancer patient Ellen Linstead went into Stafford Hospital. Whilst there, she was infected with the serious hospital bug C. difficile. She was 67.
They broke her spirit. She was frequently left in her bed covered in faeces and urine, and she tried to call for help. On one occasion, the nurse, just before she died, said, "Be careful if you sit next to your mum's bed, because her legs are very sore." And I lifted up the sheets and quite a lot of the skin had come off her legs.
Why?
Because she'd sat in wet sheets for such a long time.
And Deb's mum was not alone. Bella Bailey had also been in Stafford Hospital.
It was just utter chaos sometimes. Nobody got the medication on time, nobody got their fluids, nobody got their food on time. There would be patients crying because they were in so much pain. It was just totally out of control.
Mum would continually say that she was in pain throughout her spine, her back and her ribs. And I raised this concern with the clinicians, and they said that they didn't know there was no reason that Mum should be in pain.
Her mum had actually fallen twice in hospital, but Deb was not told the full story. She later discovered x-rays which revealed only too clearly why her mum was in agony.
She'd got a fractured spine and she'd got fractured ribs.
So you were doing physiotherapy exercises with your mother?
Yes.
And unbeknownst to you, she had a fractured spine?
And fractured ribs.
The hospital originally claimed Ellen Linstead had died from her cancer, but in fact she died as a result of the infection caught in hospital. Her daughter was told it was so extensive her mum would be buried in a sealed body bag to prevent the ground being contaminated.
and they say we just seal the bag and we put your mum in this body bag and then she'll go in the ground. And that made me think at that point, I can't ever let that happen to anybody else's mum.
But it was happening again and again. When Julie Bailey's mum, Bella, died avoidably in 2007, she felt Stafford Hospital ignored her concerns. So she launched a campaign, Cure the NHS, which discovered that hundreds more patients at mid-staffs had suffered.
I wrote to all of the executives telling them there was a problem at the hospital, and basically they ignored us. They didn't do anything. They didn't want to know.
But the hospital wasn't just ignoring patients and their families. It seems they were also ignoring the statistics. In 2007, the independent research organisation Dr. Foster found that mid-Staffordshire hospitals had some of the highest mortality rates in the country. But the Trust denied it had problems.
Our belief is, based on a constant mortality for 10 years, that there is not a problem.
But a year later, an expert investigation by the Healthcare Commission finally revealed the truth.
The failings at Stafford Hospital are inexcusable.
A future health secretary speaking in opposition made plain where he thought the blame lay.
The board of this trust didn't listen to complaints by patients and their families, didn't listen even to the doctors and nurses on the front line in the hospital, and were obsessed with financial results, organisational change and targets, not with the care and safety of patients.
In just 2 years, investigators found 492 more deaths at mid-staffs than would normally be expected. Many experts believe the real figure could be much higher. I'm on my way to meet Dr. Heather Wood, who spent 10 years investigating failing hospitals and was one of the leading authors of the Healthcare Commission report into mid-Staffordshire.
It was almost like everything that could, be wrong was wrong. There were too few nurses, there were too few doctors, and worse than that, there was no governance. So people weren't keeping proper track of things that went wrong. Mistakes, therefore, were repeated. People came in and their condition was missed altogether or misdiagnosed. So really, it was a very serious picture.
Was it a one-off?
I don't think it was a one-off. No, not at all.
One organisation with an independent national overview of problems in the health service is Action Against Medical Accidents. It's a specialist charity for patient safety.
And then what date was she discharged?
Its helpline receives 3,500 calls a year from across the country. Do you believe that mid-staffs could happen again?
What our helpline and our casework tells us is that whilst Stafford was unique in terms of the scale of the problem, in actual fact we see elements of what happened at mid-Staffordshire in hospitals all around the country.
In the 10 years since Dr. Foster started publishing mortality statistics, the overall trend of patient deaths in hospitals is down. But that's no reason for complacency. The latest government figures show that last year nearly 3,000 patients died, while more than 7,500 suffered serious harm because of unsafe care in our hospitals. At Exeter University, a former chief executive of 2 NHS hospital trusts has made a special study of patient safety in the health service.
Doctors, nurses, managers do not realise that the level of harm that's going on in hospitals. Most hospitals are now having more and more patients coming through the front door. The money stands still, if not reducing. The number of staff are therefore at the same level. They're having to do more work and work harder and faster. The research is very clear that where staff have to work extremely hard and overwork, they are much more likely to make mistakes.
When you're dealing with people's lives, mistakes come at a heavy cost. In October 2008, the Titcombe family had their second baby, Joshua, at Furness General Hospital, part of Morecambe Bay Trust.
Perfect little boy, absolutely beautiful little baby boy, over the moon. But it was a short time after his birth that things started to go wrong.
Over the course of that day, Joshua showed signs of becoming increasingly unwell.
We were repeatedly told that Joshua was fine and that we didn't need to worry about Joshua. But throughout that 24 hours, he was never looked at by a doctor.
Joshua collapsed a day later. His condition was so severe, he needed urgent transfer to a specialist hospital.
The infection had been left for so long that it had rotted part of his lung away. And the doctor said, we're going to have to turn his life support off now. We're just going to have to let him go. And we sat, me and Hua, outside the room, knowing that we'd never see him again. We had to say goodbye to him. And he died on November the 5th.
Joshua had had a treatable infection which the hospital had failed to spot.
It really was a completely unnecessary death. It could have been avoided with just the most basic care. Nothing complicated. There was no risk of giving Joshua antibiotics. One dose of antibiotics and all of it could have been avoided.
And Joshua was not the first baby to die as a result of poor care at Furness Hospital.
We were told that Joshua was a one-off, but we found out that wasn't true. Similar issues that occurred in Joshua's case had happened before, and people knew about them.
Just 10 days before Joshua was born, senior medics were raising serious concerns about avoidable deaths of babies in the maternity unit. Following one such death of baby Alex Davy Brady, a consultant wrote, "This has happened in our unit in the past. If we don't take appropriate precautions and positive steps, I'm sure that this is going to happen again in future." Joshua Titcombe died 3 weeks later. His father has spent the last 4 years struggling to get to the truth about what happened.
It's felt like everyone at every stage is putting an obstacle in your way. The Ombudsman saying, we're not going to investigate. You try every other body, the HSE, the Care Quality Commission didn't have the remit to do an investigation. These are all the letters. Even though the inquest took place, 2.5 years after Joshua died, the coroner felt strongly that the issues were ongoing and changes have to be made.
We found evidence that there were known serious problems at Morecambe Bay which both the Trust and the regulators failed to address properly. In September 2009, senior managers at the regulator, the Care Quality Commission, were aware of serious failings at Morecambe Bay and spoke of a systemic failure in maternity services. Yet just 6 months later, the CQC gave Morecambe Bay a clean bill of health. And even last year, the Trust was claiming that both the hospital and the maternity unit where Joshua was born were safe.
Over the past 3 years, we have made improvements, and as a result are confident that the care provided by our midwives and doctors is meeting a high standard of safety.
Just 2 months later, Dr. Foster's annual report revealed that Morecambe Bay had the highest mortality rate for any trust in England. And an expert investigation in December last year found the maternity unit was still unsafe 3 years after Joshua died.
Again, we see regulators and